I'm Dr. Stacy Molnar-Main. I'm at the Pennsylvania Department of Ed. My work focuses on school climate improvement. I'm formerly a school psychologist who worked K-12 and have been doing capacity building work at the state for a number of years, including a lot of work around bullying prevention. And I know some of you, I may be a familiar face in having worked with the Olveus program when we were doing a scale-up statewide a number of years ago. But I'm going to let Mary Dolan introduce herself because she is sort of the bullying guru statewide, and she's going to be my co-presenter.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for hanging in there. You know, you're always so humbled. Sometimes the last sessions at a conference, there's 5 to 10 folks, and sometimes there's over 100. I think your presence in the room is truly a statement, too, that this continues to be a challenge within the schools, the bullying behavior. My elevator version, my background, school counselor. I'm not going to tell you what year I started. It was, I think some of you weren't born yet, so it's a long time ago. K through 12, Elizabethtown Area School District, and then I coordinated the bullying prevention from the Center for Safe Schools, which is part of the Susquehanna intermediate unit, which really focused on Olveus back in the day, and we had over about 250 Olveus trainers, and I coordinated that whole piece for many years. Went back into the field again with the Olveus hat on, and which is, you know, of course, very evidence-based approach to bullying prevention. And then 7 years ago, I thought I was going to retire, and the department 8 years ago asked me to come on board and write the Pennsylvania Bully Prevention Support Plan. If you're old enough, you're part of the history. So to capture what has been done in this great Commonwealth over the last now 20 years and what are recommendations moving forward. I oversee the 866 helpline, which receives about 300 calls per year. They're all tier 3. Unresolved bullying and crisis type of situations that come into the helpline. In addition to overseeing that helpline, I take any of the calls that come into the Department of Ed or the governor's office that have to do with unresolved bullying situations. If it is a report of an adult bullying type behavior on a child, it does not sit with us. We don't call that bullying. It's under educator misconduct, and that goes to the Office of Chief Counsel within the district. So we take student-on-student situations, but we've really been living in Tier 3 for the last 2 years, which, you know, is another story, and we'll get into a little bit about that. But we're really, really excited today to tie this work to the framework that you live in that really can integrate, not separate, but integrate these pieces. Kind of advanced here. So what we want to do is we want to hear from you, so we'll do a little bit of Stacy has a second mic, walking around. What do you hear people say about bullying in 2019? What kind of things do you hear people saying? And everything counts in this room. And we're not going to take time to do, if you're an administrator, a teacher, or a counselor, I think we have, from the other sessions, we see we have, you know, quite a mix from everything. So what do you hear about bullying in 2019?
It doesn't stop with cell phones and social media and cyberbullying. It doesn't stop at the end of the school day. It doesn't stop on the weekends. It doesn't stop over the summer.
So the complexity in the 24 hours, 24/7.
That is claiming the lives of our students. People are dying because of it.
Right, so sometimes there is suicide attached to bullying behavior or retaliation that ends up in a bad way.
That teachers aren't doing anything about it, or that administrators aren't doing anything about it, just letting it happen?
Okay.
She said that folks say that teachers aren't doing anything about it, administrators aren't doing anything about it, they just are letting it happen.
What else do you hear people say?
It's very complicated because the bullying that happens online or in any cyber area, parents like to come to the school and ask for a resolution, and the kids might both go to the school, but it doesn't take place on school, so we're limited in what we can do.
Right, thank you. It also, when can the school get involved, or when is it the school's responsibility that it, quote, spills over into the school day? Goes back to, actually, the 2008 legislation spells out when you can react to bullying that doesn't occur in the school. Thank you.
they want to know what happened to the student who did the bullying, but because of confidentiality, and they don't get that privacy rights.
Right, we have the FERPA piece, so what did they do? Or they did, I heard they suspended them for 3 days, but what about Monday when that child comes back? What about my child?
A lot of times they don't understand what bullying is. They think that every conflict between children is bullying when it may not be.
Yes, and that's been a real catch-22 for Pennsylvania, which really has had the shout-out nationally as the #1 state in the United States in evidence-based bullying prevention work for almost 2 decades. People are just kind of getting a little tired of the word bullying, and everybody calls everything bullying, or, oh, the parent hasn't pulled the bullying card yet, they will. So that's a piece woven in. Thank you.
Looks like that's everyone. All right, thanks.
Thanks, that's a great representation of what we do here everywhere. Okay, so what we're going to do is, and I'm in my Pittsburgh mode, even though I've lived in central Pennsylvania for 40 years, so that means I'm going really fast. How many of you are from Western PA and can keep up with me? Okay, how many people are like Mary? You're not in Western PA. Calm down, slow down a little bit. A little bit. Is everybody still awake? You didn't have too much chocolate dessert like yesterday. You're doing good. Okay. But basically, and a shout out to Rachel, who attended, Rachel, wave your hand. She attended the Chester County IU training. Sometimes we kind of almost, I say experiment, to say, let's go back in the day and let's offer a bullying prevention 101 type of training and see how many people will come. And times are different. It's interesting, and I'll tell you that's why the amount of people in the room kind of caught me off guard, because on day 1 in Chester County, we had about 12 to 15, and day 2, we had 7. So, it's just an interesting piece, but I always start with, this is definitely a semester course, but we're going to give you this 101 part today in like 3 to 5 minutes. How many people feel that they've had some training, professional development, coursework, not just read an article, but you've had some kind of training in bullying prevention specifically? If you mind raising your hand, if you had something, okay? How many feel that, honestly, in my pre-service and in my professional development so far, I really haven't had something that really hones in on, what is this, what do I do with it, how do I stop it, what's best practice? So it's about 50-50, thanks. Okay, so here we go. So defining bullying gets back to the lady's point over here about is everything bullying, or what's the difference between bullying and conflict? CDC describes bullying as any aggressive behavior that involves observed or perceived power imbalance, and it's repeated multiple times, and it's highly likely to be repeated. The caveat in the CDC definition that we didn't put up here, it does not include siblings or dating partners. I think that was to really tease out domestic violence and not weave that within bullying. We don't have Dan Olveus's definition up here. He certainly is the grandfather of almost all research you'll ever find in bullying prevention goes back to the work of Dan Olveus from Norway, who I guess he's probably in his late 80s today, professor. His research, and the definition is the same. Some people say, does it really have to be repeated? You can have bullying-like behavior happen once, but for it to be considered bullying or harassment, it has a repetitive part. Doesn't mean you don't move to stop it when it happens one time or appears to be.
And I would add, the issue of the power imbalance is really the critical piece in bullying situations. And so what can power imbalances look like at different developmental levels? Mm-hmm. Think about it. It might be size, right? It may be that someone has a larger social group or more social power. It may be around humor or intellect, the ability to utilize those particular skills at the disadvantage of another student. It may be that someone is more adept at manipulating social media, and therefore that's where the power imbalance demonstrates itself. So I think that the issue that we get at when we say power imbalance is that the kid that's targeting feels afraid because they don't feel like they have the power to change it. Okay? And I think that that's really critical. So if you're in a situation in that you're perceiving it's a conflict, it's two kids that don't get along, but you ask additional questions and you realize that one of those kids actually feels like that the other person is so in control of the situation that they can't get out of it, then that's a clue to you that the student may be experiencing this as bullying. So even if it appears to you to be like a normal conflict, the perception that I am unable to change the situation and that I'm just going to have to live with being embarrassed every day or being, being manipulated by this person, that's where the bullying comes in. And that is where we start to see the roots of some of the long-term and short-term effects of bullying that have negative developmental consequences.
Thank you, Stacy. And it can be, at a kindergarten level, it can be because that very popular little girl with the really cute ponytails and the bow is really in charge of the ball. And at that point she seems to be really popular, but she's really using bullying type behavior. It can be physical. Traditionally, that's how it was thought back in the day. Certainly verbal, social, and of course online. The calls we get to the department, almost every bullying scenario, including second graders that have filmed each other on the bus with their cell phone, involves some form of social media. And if it's not the kids, it's the parents sometimes weighing in on social media about the situation as well. This is really important, and we're not going to have time to do this and really act this out, but I think Rachel had the opportunity to learn about this. I'm going to pick on you, Rachel, because you were just in my class, but this is very, very important. The social, ecological, the psychosocial side of bullying. Once you learn this circle, and how many people have been through a training where you role play it? In PA, we're going to have some folks that have. Would you agree with me that once you learn this, you see every bullying situation through this circle moving forward, whether it's in your church, service organization, your workplace, or children? It does not happen in isolation. There is the person doing the bullying, there's the henchmen or followers that are cheering it on, maybe not starting it, and all the way down to disengaged type onlookers that just try to stay out of it, and then you get into the possible defenders and the defenders. And basically, the research has shown it's not about having the child who's bullying become more assertive and stand up to the bully. It doesn't mean you don't teach assertiveness skills. It doesn't mean that if a child is in a safe place that they can't try, like you might say to a coworker. I just feel really sad when you say that to me. Think about that as an adult, what it's like to take that on if you've been, the target of this behavior. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have children try to stop it, but they also have to know immediately, A, are they safe trying that? And B, if it doesn't work, what's the next step? Because the research has shown that the shift comes is when the bystanders say to that child, and all over PA you see these beautiful efforts of the bully bench and the buddy bench, and all these things, or kids that, because they've learned in your class meetings and so on, would you come sit with us at lunch? We saw for 2 days you've sat by yourself. Please come join us. Right? That's where the power is absolutely in the bystanders. That possible defender going over to the child who's doing the bullying and saying, I don't like the way you're treating Susie, the probability of that changing things is very, very low and actually could escalate things. So it's really important to have your mind wrapped around this. And once you know this, when something unfolds in your classroom, you'll be able to see who's where. And for children that are trained in this, I've seen a kindergarten situation where they came to, my sister-in-law taught for about 26 years at the kindergarten level, who was deep into, school climate, bullying prevention efforts, and she would have kindergartners say, Miss Dolan, I saw she was a disengaged onlooker, and she could have gone over there and asked her to play with us. So, the kindergarten level even got the dynamics of this and could call out, where was Rudolph on the circle?
So I would just make the point that if we look at this circle, the research suggests that in the majority of bullying situations that this social dynamic is at play. That bullying rarely happens when it's just the target and the bully alone, because the bully gets power from being able to get people to laugh or get other people to see them as powerful. And so there needs to be an audience for that to happen. And so the goal of a 3-tiered approach to bullying prevention should be to be implementing things at the Tier 1 level that educate students about this circle and build skills and expectations and a reinforcement or acknowledgement system that helps kids move over at least one. So for example, if you are a follower or henchman, or if a student is a follower or henchman, this is the one that sort of joins in the bullying once it gets started, you want to see them be a quiet supporter. Okay, that would be progress, right? Instead of jumping in and starting to make fun, that you just sort of sit there and sneer, that's improvement. And likewise, the child that is the disengaged onlooker, we want them to recognize that, that there's something that they can do. Okay? And while they may not get up and say, I'm going to defend so-and-so, they are going to do something else to help the situation. Okay? And so when we're talking about Tier 1, it's really targeting those specific players through educational intervention. Okay?
And we had the time to do an exercise and have you come and stand where you feel on the circle most of the students in the building fall. It's always like in the middle. The good news is most of the kids and on self-reports don't like bullying, but they don't know what to do about it. So the good news is that most of your kids are down not needing beyond a Tier 1 education and support. Fortunately, there's just a few, and we'll talk about the data a little bit about the prevalence of bullying, but as you know, it only takes one unresolved situation to impact the whole climate of that classroom or of that school. So, you know, it's not about like how many kids are up there in the bullying realm, but it is a minority. Most of the kids want to do the right thing, and that's really good news. Concerns about children who bully others. I have to share with you that this research is actually kind of old in that it only studied boys. And there has been research since that studies the increase in violence in girls as far as moving from verbal aggression to, you know, more physical aggression and so on. But this was actually done on boys. But I won't read those to you, but you can just see that it's not only Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention for the child who's bullied, but I can't tell you how many times, because I almost always call the school on the other side of the report from the parent, where I hear that the response, the Tier 3 intervention has been, he's been suspended for 3 days. And that's the end of the intervention. You know, and so we have to think about this. It's not just the target that needs the intervention, the Tier 3. It is definitely the child displaying the antisocial behavior, because one does not want anyone to end up here. Boys who bully traditionally, in traditional ways at the middle school level are 3 times as likely to be incarcerated. So, you know, you have to really look at that piece as well. Possible effects of being bullied. Anytime we speak about bullying, and Stacy and I both have been in this work for almost 2 decades. That's kind of scary, right? But for a long time, and every time, everybody in this audience has been on that circle at some point in their life, and you've moved and shifted in different places. But, you know, in these talks, there's always people in this audience that, you know, take you back to, you remember exactly where you were, you remember exactly what you were wearing, sometimes maybe smells, or, you know, it can be connected to PTSD. You know, it absolutely unresolved bullying. The good news is, with the challenge of, do we talk about bullying too much, or these pieces that we talk about of everybody thinking everything's bullying, the good news is there does seem to be some movement of the needle that, thank goodness, we don't look at this as this is going to build character. You know, that it's taken a long time to maybe move a bit that way. Also remembering on our circle, the bystanders, is if any of you just watched a scenario go on and didn't know what to do, or thought, if I get involved, I'm going to be the next target, it has an impact on you as well as a bystander. And obviously, I talked a little bit about this already, it absolutely affects climate. All you have to do is think about a workplace. And if you've ever had any type of adult bullying behavior happen in the workplace, you know what kind of atmosphere that can create, because it's not just child behavior, you know, it's human behavior. So it definitely, and a lot of it still happens under the radar screen. I still hear a lot of schools say, but we don't have proof. So, but the parent will come back and say, so what you're saying is you don't believe me, but, you know, the goal is never to bully in front of other people. So, you know, that's a real catch-22, because it takes time and investigation. At this point, Stacy, did you want to add anything before?
I'm gonna, would you
Ready?
mind
I'll be
switching things for me?
I'll be
I'd rather stand down here if you
Oh, I'd be happy to, sure.
Okay, so just a little more on the prevalence and impacts of bullying. How common is it? How common is bullying? Well, our national data, the YRBS, the most recent administration whose results are available, suggests that 19% of high school students report that they've been bullied in the last 12 months. The same survey indicates electronic bullying is occurring at a lower frequency. Does that surprise anyone? Yeah, surprised me. Pardon me? It's two different. The last one is a different study. So if you look at the citation at the end, the YRBS is what we came up with what's reporting 14.9%. The Cyberbullying Research Center, they're synonymous.
Yeah.
The electronic bullying and cyberbullying are the same thing. The reason that that's shown there is that when you're looking at bullying data, you have to ask those questions. How are they defining it in order to determine how much stock you put in the data?
Right.
So in this case, the Cyberbullying Research Center, which develops surveys specifically around electronic bullying or cyberbullying, found that students report at a much higher rate if it's well defined and if they have specific examples of what it looks like. Students often don't recognize that the things that they're doing on Snapchat are actually examples of cyberbullying, okay? And so the point and the reason that we put that there, and you pulled it right out, Rhonda, what's the difference? Why would that be so different? It shouldn't be different. What's different is that in the second survey, they defined it much better. Our kids are doing a lot of things online that they don't define as bullying that can have a really negative effect on kids. How many of you have children that use Snapchat? Okay. A lot of the social interactions that occur online involve the memification of other people. Do you realize that? You take a picture of someone in class and you make a meme about them, and then you post it online. And I talk to my own daughter who's 15, and she does this stuff, and I'm like, do you realize how that could be an example of bullying if that person perceives that to be so embarrassing that they don't want to come to school tomorrow, or that, that people start sharing this? She's like, it's not bullying, that's just fun. So how do we address that if we aren't talking about it? Okay, so that example is shared so that this is the world our kids are in. No one's talking to them about it if you aren't talking to them about it. Some parents might be, but for the most part, they're creating their own social norms and they need help defining what it is. State data is from the PAYS, the Pennsylvania Youth Survey. Raise your hand if your school does the PAYS. Excellent. Super source of data. I encourage schools, you all, to go back. If you're doing your PBIS and you have your Swiss systems, consider every other year administering the PAYS to your kids, because it gives you information about risk and protective factors. What are the things that our kids are doing besides getting ODRs? Are they smoking outside of school? What percentage of them are using opioids? What percentage of them experience bullying? All of that stuff. And what percentage of them have a parent home after school? All important information as you're developing your tier 1, 2, and 3 interventions. Anyway, our PAYS data tells us that about 28% of kids in the state indicate that they've been bullied in the past year. We can't compare that to 2017 data because they changed the question. Once again, an example, it matters how we frame things. And that the highest group that reports bullying on the PAYS is our 8th grade students. Okay? So what does that tell you from a 3-tiered perspective? What would your universal interventions, might they look like at 8th grade? Maybe you spend more time on bullying prevention 7th and 8th grade, right, than maybe you do in 9th grade. So I think that, again, consider giving surveys that allow you to tap into this so you have this data to act from. And in the state, 16.5% indicated they were electronically bullied, or often referred to as cyberbullying. I don't put a lot of stock in that because I think, again, the survey is so vast, it doesn't clearly hone in and define for kids what that might look like, okay? We need to do more and more around educating there.
And I think, too, if, I don't know, how many folks are familiar with the new Pennsylvania school climate surveys? It's kind of a new tool. They are free, online. The results come to your school, not to PDE. But there is an example where you can collect data. What is the staff perception of all school climate? There's some bullying questions in there. And so what do you do if, like, 5% of the staff perceive bullying as a problem, problem, but 45% of the kids perceive it, right? So what do we do in our climate committees to look at that data and say, you know, why here, why now? What's this gap? What does this mean, right? So that's another thing too. You want to make sure you're capturing perception. So the number one question, you know, one of the number one questions I get asked is, so Mary, do you feel that bullying is really a problem, or do you really feel it's getting worse? What do you think? That's kind of one of the big questions of today, because Pennsylvania has been at this work for about 20 years. What do you think? I'm really curious. Do you feel, I mean, there's a lot of people in this room, which says a lot to me, but do you feel there's a misperception that bullying is really not a problem, or do you feel it is one of the bigger problems? Does anybody want to speak to that? That'd be great to get some of your input. Way in the back, yes. Yeah, we do, because we're taping it. Thanks.
So I feel at the elementary level, too many things are labeled as bullying when it's really child development, children learning and growing and figuring out how to interact with others. But then the parents take it to that next level and it just explodes. Suddenly, bullying here, and bullying here, and bullying here, when in reality, this little boy just hasn't been exposed to children on the playground because he's not allowed.
Right.
To go to preschool. Right. There's a lot of that in primary grades, and it does have like a negative impact on what the community thinks about schools. So parents are always appease them, but yet also address the child who might have those bullying tendencies, and often when they do, because that's what they know.
Great.
They train what they know, and what they think, and that's another aspect.
All right, so she said that she believes that at the elementary level there are a lot of students that maybe have not had a lot of experience in social situations and in social problem-solving situations, and they run into difficulties on the playground or in other environments, and they tend to over-identify bullying and go to their parents, who then react, and it becomes difficult for the school to resolve it. And she suggested that maybe we need to pay attention to, obviously, kids that are engaging in aggressive behavior. She's not suggesting that we don't do that, but she also thinks there's a skill piece of it, and we're going to talk about that. Others?
I also think there's a problem, or I'm having a problem, and maybe it's my age, because of the electronics and the cyber stuff and the memes. I mean, my class, all they do is talk about memes. I think they are defining their social boundaries now, and I think we as adults are behind because we don't speak the same speak. We don't play the same game. Okay, I'm talking about myself, maybe some of you young guys do. But we don't play the same games, we don't understand, no matter how much we try to understand them, there's a world out there. I mean, if we haven't caught up technologically to kids, how are we catching up to them when you're talking about online and social media?
Right, so I'm hearing you say that there's things we can be looking at as bullying-like behavior that the kids don't, is part of the thing, too.
They will eventually, but they don't now.
Right, eventually they'll see that as mean behavior, but not in this place in development.
Yeah. And so let me suggest that as we're thinking Tier 1 with our teachers, we need to be thinking about where our teachers are in terms of their experiences and understanding of the worlds in which their kids inhabit. Because if references to memes and other things are coming into the classroom, that's inserting itself into the instructional process, right? And so how can we get our teachers better equipped to understand the media and the social media that students are using and bring some instruction at the Tier 1 level around that? Now, the folks in the bullying prevention community say the skills are the same. The context may differ, whether you're on Snapchat or you're on whatever. You may not understand the technology, but these bystander skills are the same. Are you going to stay there? Are you going to join in? Are you going to stand up and say this isn't acceptable? Are you going to get off that media? Are you going to share that meme? Because that's part of being an active supporter if you share that meme. So the bullying circle still exists, but what you do really depends on that context, right? And the norms of that environment. And I encourage you to educate your teachers and have them engage in students in applying the bullying circle to those real life scenarios. Even if kids make up the scenarios, they may be the best ones to do it.
So two or three things. We live in a hyper-connected world, and my generation can't catch up with my son's generation. There is no amount of professional development that will keep us present with these students. It's just not going to happen. However, we can try to infuse ourselves into their world as best as we know how. We also live in a globalized economy. I mean, my goodness, we can't catch up there. I know my cultural identity, but kids are seeing so many different cultural identities within our world that they're struggling there. So for me, in my position, like you said, hyperconnected, hypersensitive. We're seeing so much. We have to intentionally educate them. They don't know what bullying is. They don't know what terroristic threats is. I'm a dean, so I'm like, they're not terrorists, you know? So we have to intentionally teach before we even label them. We're labeling these children. So, hyperconnected, globalized, hypersensitive, we need help.
Thank you so much. And we have to teach all. I cannot tell you how many administrators, and I did this too as a counselor before I had any education in bullying prevention, say, well, but Mary, I held a mediation for them. That's wonderful for conflict. That's when we'll talk a little bit about misdirections a little bit. That's wonderful for conflict. I've seen mediation, I've seen middle schoolers, peer mediators change lives, okay? But when it's one-sided and it's harassment and it's bullying, it can be traumatizing for a child to sit down. It is not what you want to do, and that all comes from basic education. I agree with you, and we're just not doing it. It's not, parents are shocked every time I tell them that you need to understand our legislation in 2008 required 0 professional development. So the baseline, what's the difference between bullying and conflict, right? Misdirections are not out there, and it's the base information. And then one more comment I would say too, in the everybody makes everything about bullying, is it's not unusual that the calls that come to the department start like this. Well, Mary, you do know that students commit suicide over this today. Or Mary, have you heard that there can be retaliation in the schools? And you know school shootings happen because of this. So there's a different parent that's initiating that conversation today than even 5 years ago because of their awareness. So I think some of it is that kind of that bell curve of awareness, but then tying that back into education. You know, how are we educating our parents on the difference between bullying and conflict and all these wonderful, normal, pro-social skill, Tier 1 learning type of things? Stace, you want to speak to this?
Sure, just so that, to put it out on the table, children that are disabled are more likely, 2 to 3 times more likely to report experiencing bullying. And I share that with you for a couple of reasons. One is we talk about our tiered interventions with kids. We obviously want to look at skills that these kids might develop that might be protective against bullying if they're more likely to be targeted. But we also have to recognize that students with disabilities are part of a protected class. And if they're being bullied, that needs to raise red flags for you around protected class issues, civil rights issues, okay? And so if a child who's been bullying, the parent has been bullied, the parent reports that they've been bullied, it's the same as if someone reports that they've been harassed because of their race, okay? You need to treat that not as bullying, but as a potential civil rights issue. So you need to amp it up in terms of your response, okay?
If you Google the Dear Colleague letter 2014, or 2016, I think 2014, I can't believe it's so many years ago. The latest one that came out about bullying in special education, it spells out very clearly why you should have an IEP meeting for any child who may be bullied that has an IEP or a 504 plan. And there's a misconception that I would only have that meeting if the child is bullied because of their disability. That's not the case. If they have an IEP or a 504 plan and they are being bullied, you should absolutely reference the Dear Colleague letter, I think it's 2014, as to why you should be having an IEP meeting to address the bullying situation. Most people are not aware of that.
We also know that LGBTQ students are also more likely to be targeted for bullying, and here's just some statistics about that. And again, if we're looking at universal level interventions, if we're not calling these types of issues out in our examples that we're sharing with kids and engaging them in social problem solving using the bullying circle, they may think it's bullying. It's not bullying if it's about that weird kid who's sort of gay, right? Because maybe teachers turn the other way. We need explicit examples. If this kid dresses in this particular way, Is it okay does the bullying circle apply? Yeah, it does. But if we don't use those real life examples with kids and we have teachers or adults in the building that look the other way around those issues, then the kids may assume that it's not bullying, that someone invited that bullying because of their identity or whatever. And again, depending on where you are, although gender identity is not a protected class in Pennsylvania, there have been examples where the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission and the Office for Civil Rights have gotten involved because teachers or schools have failed to respond to bullying of kids that did not adhere to gender identity norms. They looked at that as a form of gender discrimination. So, you know, it really doesn't matter. Kids are kids. We should care regardless of their identity, that they don't feel afraid to be in school or they don't feel targeted. Okay, so what are the institutional costs? We know that from a study out of the University of Virginia that when a school has a bullying climate, that is, bullying is common in the school, that achievement is lower. So one study in the state of Virginia that included thousands of students, hundreds of schools, found a 3 to 6% reduction in high-stakes testing pass rates in schools that had high rates of bullying. We know that 20% of schools in charter, families that go to charter schools in the state of Michigan identified safety concerns as their primary reason of moving. Within the cyber school community, they're the largest cyber school in Pennsylvania. In talking to administrators there, have told us that as high as 50% of the kids in their school identify bullying as one of the reasons that they chose to leave the public school. So each of those enrollment costs sort of add up, right? And then there has been a cost-benefit analysis of bullying in Pennsylvania, and it looked at dropout costs, OSS costs, and alternative education costs for bullying, and it basically said for every dollar that you spend on bullying prevention, you save thousands of dollars in costs related to these other things.
Okay, so we're going to have to shift a little bit on this because we don't have a handout for everyone, but in your packet there is a sheet that's called Examining Best Practices in Your School, and we just found out that we'll be able to post everything to the Google Drive so everybody can access these.
Sure. So I'm going to read each of the statements, and I want you to come up with a number in your head, okay? So this is the 3 tiers bullying self-assessment. There are 18 statements, and I want you to think, give yourself a 5, and you can jot down these numbers along the side of your paper if you have one. Give yourself a 5 if you've arrived at this and you can show everybody how it's done, okay? A 4 if you implement this practice most of the time, all the way down to 1 that we are not aware of this best practice, but maybe we can do something now, okay? All right. So the first one is focus on this entire school environment. 1 to 5. Do you think about bullying prevention as involving a focus on the whole school environment?
And just think of your building, you know, what is your building? Because every building is different.
2, have there been specific efforts to garner staff and parent support for bullying prevention? 5, definitely. 1, not yet. Have you formed a group to coordinate the school's bullying prevention efforts with other school climate improvement activities? Do you regularly assess bullying in your school? Do you track possible bullying across settings in the school? So not confirmed bullying, but possible bullying. Someone saw Jimmy call Mary a name. Is that tracked and shared? Do you establish and enforce consistent school rules, policies, and procedures related to bullying prevention? Do you train your staff on bullying prevention and intervention? Is there class time spent teaching about bullying, bystanders' roles, and bystander skills at a developmentally appropriate level? Okay? Do you spend class time teaching SEL, social emotional learning skills, that are implicated in bullying prevention? We'll talk to you about what those specific skills are. Do you increase supervision in hotspots where bullying occurs? Do you have systems of reinforcement when you see students engaging in social problem solving and upstander behavior? When we say upstander, we mean not bystander, but stand up. Do you acknowledge staff who apply bullying prevention best practices? Do you ensure staff intervene consistently and appropriately in bullying situations? And when staff do not respond to bullying reports as expected, do you provide retraining for staff? Do you implement skill building or support building interventions for children at risk of bullying involvement? Do you have individualized interventions for students involved in bullying? Do you continue all these efforts over time? And finally, do you provide opportunities for meaningful youth engagement in bullying prevention in school climate improvement efforts? That's the bonus question.
You don't have to raise your hand. Do some of you feel, okay, we're doing okay? Do some feel, oh, please come help us tomorrow? Yeah. Well, and you know, because I think if I haven't learned anything else about bullying prevention in the last 2 decades, is I continue to learn and understand, and the research back this again in 2016. There was a major research project that was a meta-analysis of every study that ever occurred in bullying prevention, is that the story is still the same. Bullying prevention has to be comprehensive. It has to be 3-tiered. It's not one assembly on a Friday afternoon, and Stacy will get into that in a little bit about the misdirections as well. But I think that, you know, the part that we all need to remember, and if you think about this as adult behavior, bullying is a very specific antisocial behavior. True bullying, right? When you dig down and figure out it's not conflict, because most things are conflict. Most behaviors that you see are conflict and on that, you know, learning pro-social skill level. But bullying itself, harassment, is a very specific antisocial behavior. So if we throw that in and just throw it in with all the other conflict things, and actually let's not even use the word bullying, then we're not going to be able to call out and address and intervene in a very specific way.
So just as we want to be specific in teaching skills, including young children who don't have maybe the social skills or social problem-solving skills to work through bullying conflicts that occur on the playground or normal issues that we would want them to be able to work through, we need to explicitly teach that. We can't assume that you came to school and you didn't have the skill, and so just like if you came to school and didn't read, just send them out with the group and hope they read, and if they don't, it's on them. I mean, with social skills and social emotional skills and bystander skills, we need to be explicit too. So, using the MTSS lens to think about bullying prevention, we want to make clear that there is a social emotional learning component. So there is a piece of bullying prevention that you're going to be able to do by having clear expectation and teaching skills, behavioral skills, right? I know some of you are probably using stop, walk, and talk. Raise your hand if you're using the stop, walk, and talk model. Okay, that's one skill, but it's not going to be enough to address every bullying scenario. So when we're talking about teaching skills around bullying prevention, we're talking about these social and emotional skills that are on the right that we know are implicated in bullying, and we're talking about applying them in a social problem-solving way. So one of the big mistakes that adults make in teaching bullying prevention skills is to teach too few skills to kids. To assume that all you need to do is tell someone to stop, or assume all you need to do is have one person say, enough is enough. In reality, there's going to be complex situations where someone's dealing with a power dynamic and they're feeling afraid, and they've got to have flexible thinking skills so that they can come up with multiple strategies that they can apply over time. So part of the work is, yes, teaching kids to recognize feelings in themselves and others, right? Because those are the building blocks of empathy. Teaching them perspectives taking. Awareness of feelings combined with perspective taking can at least build, maybe not the feeling of empathy, but the ability to do the cognitive piece of empathy. How might that person feel? Even if I can't feel for them, I can imagine maybe how they might feel. Emotional regulation. One of the big skills that kids need who are observing bullying or who are targeted is the ability to control themselves in that situation so that they can think more clearly and come up with a plan, right? Friendship building skills, assertiveness, advocacy skills, and at the bottom is social problem solving skills. How do we teach social problem solving skills? There are specific programs that can help you with that. You know, part of it involves assessing the situation, what might be happening, what can I do, what else can I do, what else can I do, what else can I do? That critical, flexible thinking of generating lots of solutions is a big piece of that, and then evaluating what you might do in that situation. Stop, talk, and walk is one thing, but what else might they do, okay?
And Stacy, if I could just add too, probably one of the biggest misconceptions in bullying prevention is that, you know, you're just going to learn about bullying all year long and the rules and don't bully, where social emotional learning is tier 1 bullying prevention. You know, and again, that's that integration. And with having PBIS, you have that perfect framework. This used to come at the schools in the way of some programs. Some of you might have had like a program like Olveus, where you got a comprehensive, but a lot of schools do not have a program approach. But you don't need to have a program approach if you're going at it through your tiers like this. So social emotional learning is bullying prevention, as long as you are layering in identifying what it is, right? And how to specifically respond, what you have to learn about.
So tier 1 is inclusive and welcoming routines. If you gravitate that over to the sort of PBIS framework that you think about your behavioral expectations. Would kids interpret your behavioral expectations to be explicitly inclusive and welcoming? Or would they expect it to be a conforming set of routines, right? If I'm respectful, does that imply that I am inclusive, right? Caring may be a school-wide expectation that might imply inclusivity. But anyway, I want you to go back and think about that. When you look at those school-wide expectations, are they explicitly reflecting norms that are welcoming and inclusive? You want to have explicit policies. The state requires that you have a bullying prevention policy. What most schools don't often have is the procedures that undergird that. Okay, if a parent brings a bullying concern, what's going to happen next? If a student reports bullying to the lunch lady, what does she do with that? Okay, so make sure that you have the procedures behind so that there's consistency. Teacher and staff professional development. A tracking system for identifying potential bullying trends across settings. This is the big hole that we often see. Our state level data for some school districts says that there were 0 reports of bullying district-wide. There was no bullying in that community at all. Now, I know that that's not true because it's a social phenomenon. We know that about 20% of kids experience bullying over the course of the year. Why would that school community say that there's no bullying? Maybe they have such phenomenal prevention work that they're an anomaly in the world and they've totally extinguished bullying. But more than likely, they are either underreporting it or they're tracking it in their informal systems or their, what do you call them at PBIS? You have the school-wide system of tracking behavior, and then you maybe have a classroom level system. Major or minor, right? What about if you see something that wouldn't rise to the level of minor, but you saw some meme being passed around? How is that tracked? It's not going to make it into Swiss. So then what do you do?
Or if the bullying goes to fighting, they're going to track fighting instead of bullying.
Right. And so for us, the question is not that we don't want to modify your Swiss systems unless you at the school level decide that it makes sense, but you do need to have a system of making sure there's communication across classrooms so that you can detect kids that are being hurt. We know kids underreport to teachers if they think that teachers don't want to know about it, okay, particularly at the secondary level. So having those conversations, how do we track when we're concerned that what we saw something? It's not a minor, it's not a major, but we want to put it on the radar. That allows us to increase our supervision in the hot spots. We want to do knowledge and skill-based bullying prevention, so we want to practice those SEL skills that we talked about and have those skill lessons integrated into the academics. So tell me, in English class, how would you integrate the bullying circle into instruction? Or reading? Down here with the mic. Any reading teachers? Or yes, Mary, she's...
What about if they're like reading, I tell them that like you read about it in literature, like so you can relate to characters, understand how they feel and how they handle it. So you, I mean, I tell them that in guidance lessons, so they know that they're not alone.
So you could look at literature and you can analyze within literature whether a situation was bullying or conflict, or a situation that could have potentially been bullying. You don't, maybe not have all the information, because sometimes we don't. Who were the various bystanders? What could they have done? And a clue is, don't let kids just end with one thing, oh, they should have told an adult. That's parroting. Most kids won't tell an adult. What else could they do? What else could they do? And keep driving it home that there's always more than one thing. 2, 3, have them generate as many as possible, and if you have time, even analyze why they might choose one or another. Yeah?
You can have the role play out the story, like if they usually actually use the story characters in the circle to role play it out.
So she said you could role play using examples from literature, right? You can role play using examples from history. Who in this moment in history were the bystanders? Who were the henchmen? Look at World War II. What would we say? Those types of analyses to bring it alive. And then I think it's important to note that the media piece we cannot miss. How many of you have lessons on digital citizenship in your school district? Okay. How many of you have that as something that kids get on an ongoing basis from year to year? Excellent, excellent. They are living in a digital world. We cannot do it in 4th grade, first semester, and stop. Because the social media changes, the interactions change, we need to keep coming back to it and using those case studies to apply their skills. Tier 2, what does Tier 2 look like in a tiered response? Here's the examples. We want to pull out the idea that we want to start referring kids or identifying kids not when they're experiencing bullying, but because they might be at risk of being bullied or participating in bullying, okay? Kids that we know that are more likely to be at risk or be involved, hyperactive, impulsive kids, kids that are socially neglected or rejected, kids with with disabilities, LGBT kids. Those are all kids that we should be thinking about doing skill-building work even before they experience bullying.
And
Okay.
I think the misconception sometimes is that, if we just make those kids stronger and make them fix the bullying situation that comes upon them, that it's their responsibility. And that's not what Stacy means here. Don't let that be your takeaway, that it's about, making that child more assertive. It's not about that, but there are sometimes skills that are lacking, right, that you need to build on, that, where they can fit, or sometimes it's because you get them to be part of their club where everybody is so welcome in that particular club or activity.
And it involves the kids that are at risk of perpetrating bullying, right? We want to have our interventions for them. Now, one caveat is group treatment for kids that bully has been determined to be ineffective. In fact, it can increase bullying. So your tier 2s for kids that bullying cannot be done by bringing all the kids that are antisocial together in one group and then trying to teach them the skills. That really needs to be done on a one-to-one basis. Cognitive behavioral strategies that are implicated in bullying. And then importantly for all those bystanders, making sure your school has youth engagement, social justice clubs, opportunities for students to actively participate in shaping the school culture. Okay, that's a tier 2.
And we also, Stacy has a box there about misdirections. In the handouts, and we'll post it too, is a handout about misdirections and bullying prevention and a self-check to see, do we actually use these ourselves and what can we do different?
So at Tier 3, we're talking about individual meetings with students and parents who are involved in bullying. If you have a online bullying situation that occurs outside of school and you're trying to figure out what you should do, there's nothing that's preventing you from meeting with that parent and making the parent whose kid did it aware of what's happened. And so we encourage that. Individual plans for students who bully others, which may involve increasing their supervision and their ability to engage as freely as they may want to on the playground or in other environments until they've shown that they're not going to be involved in harming others. It may include individual counseling for students and families, and we call it support plans for students who are bullied. So if a kid is bullied, they should be able to say what they are going to do, how they're going to seek support, how they're going to keep safe, who in the school can they go to, who are they going to tell if something happens. We need to make sure that those things are formally in place. One of the things we find when we get reports at the state level is when things escalate, we ask, well, what did the school do? And the parent said they did nothing. That's troubling to us because we know usually when we talk to the school they have done something, but if you haven't sort of sat down and made it very clear to the child what support is in place, it's lost.
It's rarely in writing. We always ask that question, and some schools are like, well, I'm not going to write down what I'm going to do to keep the child safe. I don't feel comfortable in case it doesn't work. Or some are like, oh, I never thought about that. So there's usually 27 different emails, there's verbal, but when, we've been piloting this, and this tool is coming soon. It's called Administrator Guide for students who may be bullied, because we've heard too many people say, I'm not doing anything until I have proof that it was bullying. What does that mean, right? So you want to start early, and then we have a parent guide for students who may be bullied in developing an action plan. It's what you already are doing verbally and through 27 emails, but you're going to sit down and put this in one place so that we know what's the parent's responsibility in this, what is the student's responsibility. It is rarely done. It's legislated in a state like New Jersey, but in Pennsylvania, you don't ever have to write down your plan for a child who's being bullied. And the other thing, too, that I was thinking, as far as student assistance, SAP, where do you see SAP in bullying prevention? Do you see it as a Tier 2 or Tier 3? Does anybody have any thoughts, or have you utilized SAP in bullying within the tiers? You actually can check in SAP whether or not a student was referred as a target of the behavior or check because they were bullying others. Anybody ever integrate SAP into bullying? It's so important. Every time I get off the phone, I'm gravely concerned about the child I'm not hearing about, because I'm hearing from the parent of the target, okay? But the child that is bullying others, we already went over some of the potential outcomes, right? Has that child been referred to SAP? What is going on? I mean, one case I just had the other day, I'm still kind of haunted by, in the sense of what would possess this 9th grader to talk to another 9th grader like this in major racial slurs. It ended up into a whopping physical fight within the cafeteria, etc. But so honestly, the response to that was 3 days suspension. So they followed their policy. But the child that did that to the other child, people sometimes aren't even thinking in the sense of, does that boy need an intervention?
Is that a SAP referral?
I would certainly hope so,
we
right?
throw that out to you. So we need to wrap up. The one thing I do want to say is that it's very important that it's fine if the kid that bullies recognizes that they're going up the tiers because of their behavior. It's really important that if you're providing those Tier 2 skill level interventions to kids that have been targeted, that they don't see it as a punishment because they've been bullied. They really need to see it as something totally separate from the support they're getting around the bullying situation, okay? Because we do not want kids to think that they're being blamed. Oh, I'm a quiet kid and so I deserve to be bullied. We don't want them to get that message from the school. Yeah, they may get referred to a friendship group or a SEL group, and that's all because we do that for kids, every kid. We don't want them to interpret that as being a consequence for speaking up. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? All right.
In your packet, we have a resource list that is all Tier 1 type of resources, and that'll be posted. And on the way out the door, if you want to take a elementary or secondary case study example, these are based on real live things to change the names and places to protect the innocent. But you know that you could look at these and look at them through a Tier 3 to 1 lens and say, what would we do? How would we take on this situation through those tiers? Make sense? Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. A round of applause for our presenters on a great presentation.